How did the axe appear in the washroom of the hotel, and who put it there? It seemed so conveniently on hand at that particular moment. These burning questions were answered at trial. The axe that delivered John Tedrow's fatal blow to the head belonged to Charles Thomas, Seth's son, and was left as usual at the woodpile behind the hotel on the night of the murder. Some testimony showed that Seth had handed the axe to Thomas Brooke when he rushed into the hotel washroom. In another scenario, Seth hurried to the woodpile, where he grabbed the axe, returning to the washroom the moment that his daughter stepped between her lover and Tedrow. He handed the axe to Brooke, who raised the weapon and fatally struck Tedrow. These revelations led prosecuting attorney Charles Baird to charge both Thomas Brooke and Seth Thomas with murder. Marshal William H. Ragg arrested Seth and sent him to jail, awaiting the preliminary hearing held on November 4th before Mayor Samuel A. Lane. The preliminary trial lasted 2 days. After thorough examination and interviews of the many witnesses present that night, charges were dropped against Seth. It appeared that Thomas Brooke was solely responsible for the crime. When his decision was announced, Mayor Lane addressed the court.
The history of this case is largely a repetition of the great majority of the homicides of the world, in that it is directly the result of the excessive use of intoxicating liquors, the evidence developing the fact that not only was the victim, naturally as amiable as men in general, rendered quarrelsome thereby, but that several, if not all, the actors and witnesses of the fearful tragedy, except the ladies, were more or less under their baleful influence.
Thomas Brooke stood before the Court of Common Pleas facing a second-degree murder charge in January 1883. The grand jury listened to prosecuting attorney Baird's meticulous examination of the evidence and indicted Brooke, who entered a plea of not guilty. For the trial, Governor Sidney Edgerton was assigned to aid the prosecution. For Brooke's defense, General Voris was joined by fellow attorney Jacob A. Kohler. The 3-day trial opened with a revelation from none other than Brooke's sweetheart, Ellen Thomas. When testifying, Ellen admitted to asking her boyfriend why he did it in the moments after Tedrow was struck down dead. "It could not be helped," he answered, adding, "Don't cry for me." Ellen initially refused to answer when asked by the prosecution if Brooke told her he expected to be hanged for Tedrow's death. Only after Baird threatened Ellen with jail for contempt of court did she scream, "Yes, he did!" It also was her testimony that she didn't witness who had delivered the axe blow, since she was still holding Tedrow's face at that very moment, and her back was to the assailant. After a short deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Instead of second-degree murder, Brooke was found guilty of manslaughter. General Voris filed a motion for a new trial, claiming that alcohol and the defenselessness from its consumption were the real causes of the crime. It was overruled by Judge Tibbles. Brooke was sentenced to 12 years at Ohio Penitentiary in Columbus. However, beginning on March 31, 1883, Thomas Brooke served about 3 years in prison, the same length of time he had lived in America, before being paroled for good behavior and moving to the Cleveland area for the remainder of his crime-free life. This was not the end of the story, however. Before Brooke even stepped into a courtroom, there was more trouble for Tedrow and Botzum. His body was laid to rest in Botzum Cemetery on October 29th. The following day, a bizarre story was found in the Akron Beacon-Journal.
Among the baggage checked at the Valley Depot in this city this morning was a trunk, accompanied by a fine-appearing, well-dressed gentleman. There was nothing strange in this, but the fact that blood, human blood, was seen to flow pretty freely from the trunk whenever it was turned over, and seeing that the man who was with it watched it so carefully and objected to its being ended up as is common, caused the baggage men at the station named to become suspicious that that trunk contained more than ordinary goods.
Rumor of a crime quickly spread. When word reached an Akron Beacon-Journal representative, he set out to unravel the mystery. Through a coworker, he was told about the murder of a black man named Tedrow in Botzum a few days before the strange cargo appeared on the Valley Railway. After some investigation, the reporter became convinced that the body in the trunk at the train station was that of John Tedrow, despite the fact that officials in Botzum claimed that Tedrow had been buried the previous day. and his hunch proved correct. Without widespread knowledge, a Cleveland medical professor had been given proper permission to send a doctor and an assistant to the town of Botzum and claim the body for a medical cadaver. John Tedrow's body was exhumed without much affair on the evening of October 29th, and then was loaded onto a train bound for Cleveland the next morning. The body had not been drained beforehand, which caused the blood to leak out through the trunk and spill the suspicious crime rumor along the journey north. From that day forward, body claimants have been required to use properly sealed containers for cadaver transport.